Hello, this is Carol Miller. I'm a 58-year-old widow who thought the hardest parts of my life were behind me. I was wrong. My own daughter, my only child, came back into my life not with a hug, but with a demand that I sell my home, the last piece of my late husband I have left, all to pay off a debt that would unravel a truth far uglier than I could ever imagine. They thought a grieving old woman was an easy target. They learned that a mother's love, when betrayed, can forge the hardest steel. Where are you watching this from today? I hope you'll get comfortable. Maybe subscribe to the channel and listen to my story. It's a hard one, but it's real. The silence in my Ohio home used to be a comfort. It was a gentle quiet, filled with the ghosts of laughter and the scent of the rose bushes my late husband, Tom, had planted by the porch. For the past 5 years since his passing, this house hadn't been just wood and nails. It was the curator of my memories, the one place on earth I felt whole. Every scuff on the hardwood floor was a story, every creak of the stairs a familiar whisper. It was a life Tom and I had built with our bare hands, our sweat and savings poured into every shingle and window pane. It was ours. It was mine. That comfortable silence was shattered the Tuesday Ashley came home. She hadn't called. In the 8 years since she'd moved to the city, our conversations had dwindled to birthday texts and perfunctory Christmas calls. So when her sleek, ridiculously expensive car pulled into the gravel driveway, my first feeling wasn't joy, but a cold knot of dread in my stomach. A mother knows. She stumbled out of the car looking like a storm-wrecked doll. Her designer dress was wrinkled. Her blonde hair, usually coiffed to perfection, was a tangled mess, and mascara stained her cheeks in black rivulets. She threw herself into my arms, her body trembling with theatrical sobs. "Mom!" she wailed, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I've ruined everything. Everything is gone." I led her inside, my old nursing instincts kicking in. I made her tea, the way I used to when she was a little girl with a scraped knee. She sat at the oak kitchen table Tom had built, her manicured hands wrapped around the warm mug, looking like a stranger in a place she once called home. The story tumbled out between choked sobs and gasps for air. A tech startup, a sure-thing investment, a genius idea that was going to make her a millionaire. She'd poured everything into it. She claimed her savings, loans, money from investors. "It all went under, Mom," she whispered, her blue eyes, so like her father's, wide with practiced fear. "The company went bankrupt. It was a scam. I lost everything. Now they're coming after me. They're going to sue me. I'm going to lose everything I have left. I could even go to jail." My heart, the foolish, tender heart of a mother, ached for her. I saw not the 30-year-old woman before me, but the little girl who was afraid of the dark. "How much, Ashley?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She wouldn't look at me. She stared down at her tea, a single tear plopping into the mug. It's a lot," she stammered. "More than I could ever make back. They want it in 30 days, or they're filing charges." "How much?" I repeated, my voice firmer this time. She finally looked up, her eyes glistening with a desperate, chilling light. "They'll settle for $250,000, she said, the number hanging in the air like poison. "There's only one way, Mom. The only asset we have that's worth anything." The dread in my stomach turned to ice. I knew what she was going to say before she said it. Her gaze drifted past me, towards the living room, towards the pictures on the mantel, towards the very foundation of the walls around us. "We have to sell the house," she said, her voice a flat, dead thing. "You have to sell the house to save me." The room spun. My hand flew to my chest, to the locket with Tom's picture I always wore. Sell the house? This wasn't just a house. It was Tom's legacy. It was the smell of his aftershave in the closet, the feel of his hand on the small of my back as we danced in the kitchen, the echo of his voice in the workshop out back. It was the only thing that kept him here with me. She was asking me to sell his ghost. Ashley, no, I breathed. Anything but this. This is your father's house. Her face, which had been a mask of sorrow, hardened in an instant. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by an ugly, petulant anger I knew all too well. My father is dead. Mom, she snapped, her voice rising. He's gone, but I'm here, and I'm in trouble. Is a pile of bricks and wood more important than your own daughter? Do you want to see me on the street? In prison? She stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. She began to pace, her arms flailing, her words a barrage of guilt and manipulation. She accused me of not loving her, of choosing a dead man over my living child. She painted a picture of her life in ruins, of creditors hounding her, of her future being ripped away. Every word was a carefully chosen dagger aimed at the softest parts of my heart. I sank into my chair, overwhelmed and heartbroken. The daughter I had raised, the girl I had rocked to sleep in this very house, was standing before me, demanding I burn it all down to fuel the fire of her own mistakes. As she ranted, her eyes darted around the room, not with sentiment, but with the cold calculation of an appraiser. It was in that moment, beneath the storm of her manufactured hysteria, that a tiny, cold seed of doubt began to plant itself in my mind. She wasn't just desperate, she was something else, something far more dangerous. And as I looked at my daughter, I felt, for the first time in my life, that I was looking at a complete and utter stranger. Ashley's storm of tears and accusations eventually subsided, leaving an exhausted, toxic silence in its wake. She retreated to her old bedroom, a place that still held remnants of her childhood, faded posters on the wall and dusty trophies on a shelf, and slammed the door. The sound echoed through the house, a final, punctuating slam on the peace I once cherished. I was left alone in the kitchen, the lukewarm tea a bitter taste on my tongue. Her words hung in the air. Is a pile of bricks and wood more important than your own daughter? My heart screamed, yes, but my mind was a whirlwind of confusion and grief. For the next 2 days, our house became a battleground of strained silences and passive-aggressive sighs. Ashley would emerge from her room only to make dramatic, tearful phone calls in the hallway, speaking in hushed, panicked tones about deadlines and legal action. She'd stare at me with wounded eyes over dinner, leaving her food untouched, a silent accusation on her plate. It was a masterful performance of a victim in distress, and a part of me, the mother in me, was desperate to believe it. But the seed of doubt that had been planted during her first tirade was starting to grow roots. I remembered Ashley as a child, the way she could turn on the tears to get out of trouble, the way she could lie with a straight face about a broken vase. She'd always been transactional. Her affection was a currency she used to get what she wanted. Had she really changed, or had the stakes just gotten higher? On the third day, after another tense breakfast where Ashley detailed the horrors of bankruptcy court, I told her I needed to think, to get some air. I drove to the local library, the one place I knew I could find quiet and a computer that wasn't being monitored by my daughter's anxious pacing. My hands trembled as I sat down at a public terminal. I felt a pang of guilt, like I was betraying her by not simply trusting her. But Tom had always said, trust is earned. Carol, even with family. I started with the name of the tech startup she'd mentioned, Innovatech Dynamics. I typed it into the search bar, my heart pounding. The results were thin. Shockingly thin for a company that had supposedly raised and lost millions. There was a bare-bones website, full of corporate jargon like synergizing next-gen platforms and disruptive AI integration, but no names of founders, no press releases, no address beyond a P. box in Delaware. It looked less like a failed startup and more like a high schooler's web design project. A cold chill went down my spine. I started digging deeper. I searched for news articles, financial reports, anything. Nothing. It was a digital ghost. How could a company swallow so much money and leave no trace? I then searched for online chatter, forums, social media. That's when I found the first crack in her story. A small, obscure investment forum had a single thread about Innovatech Dynamics. The posts were from a few months ago. They weren't from disappointed investors, they were from angry ones. Total scam. One user wrote, "They promise huge returns. Take your money," and disappear. Another posted, "The woman who pitched it to me was named Ashley M. So charming, so convincing. Said she was an early investor herself and wanted to share the opportunity." My breath hitched. Ashley M. My Ashley. She hadn't just invested. She had been a pitchman. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I searched her name, her social media profiles, which I rarely looked at. Her public profiles were clean, full of smiling photos at charity events and lavish vacations, but I remembered an old email address she used in college. I used it to search on less mainstream platforms, and there it was, a profile on a networking site, one I hadn't seen before. It listed her as a senior investment strategist for a parent company I'd never heard of. Her profile picture showed her standing on a yacht, laughing, with her arm around a man with slicked back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name was Julian Croft. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so ugly I could barely stand to look at it. This wasn't a story of a failed investment. It wasn't a case of bad luck. The lies were too layered, too deliberate. The so-called debt wasn't to a bank or a legitimate lender. The people coming after her weren't lawyers in suits. They were the other people in on the scam, or worse, the other victims. My daughter hadn't just lost money. She had taken it. I printed out the forum posts and the profile picture, my hands shaking so badly I could barely feed the coins into the machine. I drove home in a daze, the familiar suburban streets looking alien and menacing. The rose bushes Tom had planted seemed to wilt as I passed them. The house, my sanctuary, now felt like a stage for a very dark play. When I walked in, Ashley was on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, a bored expression on her face. The distressed victim act was apparently on a break. She looked up as I entered, her face instantly melting back into a mask of anxiety. "Mom, did you think about it?" she asked, her voice trembling again. "We're running out of time." I stood in the doorway, the printed papers clutched in my hand like a verdict. I looked at her, at the daughter I thought I knew, and saw only the calculated performance. The whispers of doubt had become a deafening roar. My daughter wasn't in trouble. My daughter was the trouble. And she had brought it right to my front door. The weight of the printed pages in my hand felt like a block of ice. For a moment, I considered confronting her right then and there, throwing the evidence of her lies onto the coffee table between us. But one look at her face, her carefully constructed mask of worried innocence, stopped me. A direct accusation would just lead to more lies, more histrionics, more manipulation. I wasn't dealing with a foolish girl who'd made a mistake. I was dealing with a predator who saw me as her prey. To fight a predator, you don't roar. You watch, you learn, and you wait. I went to see Martha Hemsley. I lied, naming an old friend from the hospital. Her husband's health is failing. It puts things in perspective. I needed to buy time, to understand the full scope of this nightmare. Ashley's eyes flickered with impatience. My personal dramas were clearly an annoying delay. "That's sad, Mom, but my situation is real and it's happening now," she said, her voice sharp. "I know, dear," I said, forcing a weary smile. "I just need a little more time to process." That night, I barely slept. I lay in the bed Tom and I had shared for 35 years, the space beside me feeling colder than ever. I kept seeing that picture from the networking site. Ashley on the yacht, beaming, with that slick, predatory man. Julian Croft, senior investment strategist. What a sickeningly corporate title for a con artist. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. My nursing career had taught me one thing. When you don't have answers, you find someone who does. I thought of the names on that investment forum, the other angry victims. It was a long shot, but I needed to talk to one of them. I started cross-referencing their usernames with social media, looking for a match, anyone in the Ohio area, after hours of fruitless searching. I found one, a username, Buckeye Investor 71, had a profile picture that looked vaguely familiar. With a jolt, I realized it was Dennis Kramer, a retired accountant who used to be a patient of mine years ago. I remembered him as a sharp, no-nonsense man who was meticulous about his finances, the perfect target for a scam that promised high, stable returns. My hands trembled as I dialed the number from an old patient contact list I'd kept. I prayed he wouldn't see me as some crazy old woman. "Dennis, this is Carol Miller, Tom's wife. I was a nurse at St. Jude's." There was a pause. "Carol, of course. It's been years. I was sorry to hear about Tom." His voice was kind but strained. "Thank you, Dennis. Listen, this is going to sound very strange, but I need to ask you about something I saw online, about an investment called Innovatech Dynamics." The warmth in his voice vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "Don't say that name to me," he spat. "Those thieves. They took nearly my entire retirement fund." My heart sank. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "Dennis, the person who pitched it to you, was it a young woman? Blonde? Charismatic?" "Her name was Ashley," he said, and I could hear the bitterness in his voice. "She was brilliant. She had an answer for everything. She told us she was an early investor herself, that her own mother had invested and was set for life. She used her own family to build credibility. A real piece of work." The blood drained from my face. Her own mother had invested. She had used me, a fictionalized version of me, as a prop in her disgusting play. "Dennis," I said, my voice shaking, "that was my daughter." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with a mix of pity and disgust. "Oh, Carol, God, I'm so sorry." He then proceeded to tell me everything. It wasn't just a simple investment scam. It was a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. They targeted retirees, using the money from new investors to pay fake dividends to the early ones, creating an illusion of success. Ashley wasn't just a pitchman, she was a key player. Her youthful charm and story about her widowed nurse mother made her the perfect tool to gain the trust of people like him. But the scheme had collapsed, as they always do. The flow of new money dried up, and the people at the top, he mentioned the name Julian Croft, had vanished with the bulk of the cash. The lower-level players, like Ashley, were left to face the furious investors. "So the people after her," I clarified, my stomach churning. "It's the other victims?" "Some," he said grimly. "But I suspect she's more worried about her partners. In schemes like this, when the money disappears, the people involved get nervous. They start to see each other as loose ends. Your daughter isn't a victim. Carol, She's a co-conspirator who got double-crossed by bigger sharks. She's not running from the law, she's running from them. I hung up the phone, my body numb. The truth was so much worse, so much more vile than I had imagined. My daughter, my Ashley, had willfully and gleefully stolen the life savings of good, hard-working people. People like Dennis. People like me. She hadn't come home for sanctuary, she'd come home for cover, and for one last big score to fund her escape. My house. She wanted to pay off the criminals she worked with by making me her final victim. I walked into the living room, where Ashley was watching television, looking for all the world like a carefree young woman. She smiled at me, a bright, false smile. "Hey, Mom. Feeling better?" I looked at her, at the daughter who bore my husband's eyes, and I saw the rot that had taken root behind them. The grief I felt was profound, a physical ache in my chest. It was the grief of mourning a child who was still alive. The so-called victim was a monster, and she was sleeping in the room down the hall. The knowledge of Ashley's true role in the scam settled over me like a shroud. Every interaction with her was now tainted. Every sigh of frustration or feigned tear, an insult to my intelligence. I felt a cold fury building inside me, a feeling so foreign I barely recognized it. It was the anger of a mother bear whose cub had turned out to be a viper. For 2 more days, I played the part of the concerned, indecisive mother. I needed to understand her endgame. Was she truly in danger from her partners? Or was that just another lie to add pressure? The answer arrived on a Thursday evening, just as the sun was setting, painting the Ohio sky in shades of orange and purple. A car I didn't recognize, a low-slung, black sports car that looked menacingly out of place in my quiet neighborhood, purred into the driveway. My heart leaped into my throat. Ashley, who was in the kitchen, froze, her face turning pale. This wasn't part of her script. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, and moved with a fluid, predatory grace. It was him, Julian Croft, the man from the yacht picture. His dark hair was slicked back, and as he approached the porch, I could see his smile, the same charming, empty smile from the photo. Ashley rushed to the door, trying to intercept him on the porch. "Julian, what are you doing here? I told you I was handling it." Her voice was a panicked whisper. He simply placed a hand on her arm, a gesture that looked both intimate and controlling, and gently moved her aside. His eyes found me standing in the entryway. "You must be Carol," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Ashley has told me so much about you. I'm Julian." He extended a hand. I didn't take it. I just stood there, my hand gripping the doorframe. "You shouldn't be here," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "On the contrary," Julian said, his smile widening slightly. "I think I'm exactly where I need to be. We have a mutual interest, you and I, Ashley's well-being." He stepped past me into my house, his expensive cologne instantly invading the familiar scent of old books and lemon polish. He moved like he owned the place, his gaze sweeping across the room, assessing everything, the antique furniture, the family photos on the wall. It was the same appraising look Ashley had, but colder, more professional. "Ashley seems to be under the impression that she's a victim in all this," he said, turning to face us. He was speaking to me, but his words were a clear threat to Ashley. A misunderstanding. She wasn't a victim. She was a partner, a very convincing one. Ashley paled, shrinking under his gaze. The tough, demanding daughter was gone, replaced by a frightened girl. The business had some unforeseen complications. Julian continued, his tone casual, as if discussing the weather. Our other partners have become unreasonable. They believe Ashley has a larger share of the liquidated assets than she does. They're not polite people. They don't file lawsuits. Carol, they make problems disappear. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. I'm here to protect her, to protect our interests. The money she owes us, it's not just a debt, it's an insurance policy. As long as our former associates believe we are trying to pay them back, they'll be patient. But if they think we're hiding assets, he let his gaze drift meaningfully around my living room. They might come looking for them. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He wasn't the violent thug I had half expected. He was worse. He was a puppeteer, positioning himself as the protector while simultaneously being the primary threat. He was trying to create a triangle, him and Ashley as the endangered couple, and me as their only salvation. Then he looked at the photo of Tom on the mantelpiece. He picked it up, his thumb brushing over the glass. Tom Miller, he said softly, a respectable man, built a good life for his family. He turned the photo over in his hands. My father knew a Tom Miller. Back in the day, in business. Said he was a man who understood that sometimes. To build something beautiful, you have to get your hands dirty. A chill, colder than any I had felt before, shot through me. It was a message, clear and precise, intended only for me. This wasn't just about Ashley's scam. This wasn't random. He was connecting this current nightmare to my past, to my husband. He placed the photo back on the mantel, perfectly centered. Ashley told me the house is worth a considerable amount, he said, turning back to me, his charming smile firmly back in place. For everyone's safety, I think we should expedite the sale. I've even taken the liberty of contacting a realtor who specializes in quick, private sales. We're all in this together now. He was no longer asking. He was telling me. The charming devil wasn't just at my door. He was in my house, threatening my daughter and digging up the ghosts of my husband's past. The walls of my sanctuary were closing in, and I realized I wasn't just fighting for my home anymore. I was fighting for my life. Julian's veiled reference to my late husband, Tom, lingered in the air long after he'd gone, leaving a poisonous residue that clung to every room. His black sports car had sped away, but his presence remained, a chilling ghost that whispered of secrets I never knew existed. Ashley, thoroughly rattled, had retreated to her room, leaving me alone with the terrifying implications of Julian's words. My father knew a Tom Miller, a man who understood that sometimes. To build something beautiful, you have to get your hands dirty. Tom? My Tom? The man who coached Little League, who fixed leaky faucets for our elderly neighbors, who hummed off-key Sinatra tunes while he worked in his garden. He was the most honorable man I had ever known. Julian's words felt like a desecration, a slander against his memory. And yet, there was a certainty in Julian's tone, a confidence that suggested he knew something I didn't. My mind reeled back through the years. We had struggled in the beginning, like any young couple. Tom worked as a construction foreman, long hours of backbreaking work. I was a young nurse, pulling double shifts. Building this house had been our dream. But there was a period, about 30 years ago, when the money was impossibly tight. We were on the verge of losing the half-finished property. I remembered Tom being stressed, distant, taking on side jobs he was vague about. He started working with a new crew, a private contracting gig. When I asked, he just said it was good money and left it at that. Then, seemingly overnight, our financial troubles eased. A bonus, he'd called it, a substantial one. It was enough to finish the house and give us a cushion. I was so relieved at the time that I didn't question it. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband. Was I naive? Had I willingly blinded myself to a truth I didn't want to see? Julian's threat had turned my grief into a desperate, frantic need for answers. My home was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a puzzle box, and I suspected the key was hidden somewhere within its walls. I started in the one place that was exclusively Tom's, his workshop in the back of the garage. The air inside was thick with the familiar smell of sawdust and old oil, a scent that had always comforted me. Now, it felt suffocating. It was exactly as he had left it 5 years ago. Tools hung neatly on a pegboard, blueprints were rolled up in a corner, and a layer of dust covered everything, a fine gray powder preserving a moment in time. Where would he hide something? Tom was a creature of habit, a man of order. If there was a secret, it wouldn't be carelessly stuffed in a drawer. I ran my hands along the wooden workbenches he'd built, checking for loose boards. I tapped on the walls, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. I went through his old metal filing cabinets, which were filled with nothing more than decades of receipts for lumber and old appliance warranties. Frustration began to set in. Was I crazy? Was I letting that monster Julian plant seeds of doubt about the best man I ever knew? I was about to give up when my eyes landed on his old army footlocker, tucked away under a dusty canvas sheet in the corner. He had brought it back from his service days. As a child, Ashley had always been fascinated by it, convinced it was a treasure chest. Tom had always kept it locked, telling her it was just full of boring old army stuff. He'd lost the key years ago, he'd claimed. I knelt down, my knees cracking in protest, and wiped the dust off the heavy lid. The lock was old and rusted. I looked around the workshop, my eyes landing on a hammer and a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver. My heart pounded in my chest. This felt like a violation, a betrayal of his privacy. But Julian's threat echoed in my head. I had to know. With a deep breath, I wedged the screwdriver into the latch mechanism. It took several hard strikes with the hammer, the sharp clang of metal on metal echoing in the silent workshop, before the old lock finally gave way with a groan of protest. The lid creaked open. The top layer was exactly what he'd said, boring old army stuff. His folded uniform, a few medals, old black and white photos of a young, handsome Tom with his platoon. I lifted the tray out, my hands trembling, and underneath, my world fell apart. It wasn't a treasure chest. It was a Pandora's box. There were no jewels or gold, but stacks of old documents, bound with rubber bands that were dry and brittle with age, ledger books with columns of figures, names I didn't recognize, and property deeds. And tucked in the very bottom was a thick manila envelope. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of 2 men standing in front of a half-built structure, shaking hands. One man was a younger version of my Tom. The other man, I didn't know his name, but his face was unmistakable. He had the same slicked-back dark hair, the same predatory smile that didn't reach his eyes. He was Julian Croft's father. The air in the dusty workshop seemed to thin, making it hard to breathe. I stared at the photograph, the smiling faces of my husband and this other man, this older Julian, mocking me from across the decades. The half-built structure behind them was hauntingly familiar. It was my house, my home. The foundation of my life hadn't just been built on concrete and lumber, but on a handshake between my husband and a man who looked like a gangster. My hands shook as I delved deeper into the footlocker. The ledger books were the most damning. They were filled with meticulous, handwritten entries, dates, sums of money, and initials. J.C. Sr. appeared over and over again. The entries detailed payments for materials, labor, and security. But the numbers were far too large for a simple residential construction project. This wasn't a record of a side job. It was the accounting of a criminal enterprise. There were property deeds, not just for our lot, but for several others in the county, all signed over to a holding company I'd never heard of. And then I found the news clippings, yellowed and brittle. They were from a local paper 30 years ago. The article spoke of a federal investigation into a loan sharking and money laundering operation run by the local mob. Several key figures had been arrested, but the kingpin, a man named Julian Croft Sr., had vanished, rumored to have fled the country, leaving his associates to take the fall. The investigation, the article said, had stalled due to a lack of evidence and witnesses. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of secrets and lies. The bonus that had saved our home wasn't a bonus at all. It was blood money. Tom hadn't just been a foreman on a dirty job. He must have been involved. A trusted lieutenant, perhaps. He was the local face, the man who knew construction, the one who could physically launder the dirty money into clean, tangible assets, like houses. He had gotten his hands dirty to build something beautiful, just as Julian had said. And when the operation went south, Tom must have walked away, keeping his head down, keeping his secret buried in this footlocker, hoping it would die with him. But it hadn't died. It had a son, Julian Croft Jr. Wasn't just here because of Ashley's petty scam. That was his excuse, his way in the door. He was here to collect on an old family debt. The money Ashley had helped steal was likely a drop in the bucket compared to what he believed his father's old partner owed him. He was here for his inheritance, and my house was the crown jewel. A wave of nausea washed over me. I felt like a fool. My entire marriage, my entire life in this house, felt like a lie. I looked at the photos on the workshop walls, of Tom teaching a young Ashley to ride her bike on the lawn, of us celebrating our anniversary on the porch. Were any of those moments real? Or was this dark secret always lurking beneath the surface? A cancer on the heart of our family? This revelation changed everything. It explained the poison in Ashley's soul. Maybe she didn't inherit just her father's blue eyes, but also a latent seed of his criminality, a belief that the rules didn't apply to her. It explained Julian's chilling confidence, his sense of ownership. He didn't just see my house as a payday, he saw it as his birthright. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the workshop for what felt like hours, surrounded by the sins of my husband. The grief I felt was sharp and complex. I mourned the man I thought I knew, the simple, honorable man I had loved. And in his place was this stranger, this man who had made a deal with the devil to give me the life I cherished. Did he do it for me? For us? Did that make it any less wrong? Slowly, the grief and confusion began to harden into something else. A cold, clear resolve. Julian and his father had used my husband. Julian and my own daughter were now trying to use me. They saw me as a relic, a soft, sentimental old woman who was an obstacle to be removed. They thought the secrets in this box gave them all the power. They were wrong. I carefully placed everything back into the footlocker, except for one ledger and the photograph of Tom and Julian Croft Sr. I locked the chest, sliding the broken latch back into place. I would not let them destroy Tom's memory entirely, nor would I let them take the last thing I had left. This house may have been built on a foundation of lies, but I would not let it be torn down by them. The box of sins from the grave wasn't just a curse. It was a weapon, and I was finally ready to learn how to use it, armed with the devastating truth from the footlocker. I moved through my own home like a ghost. My grief for the husband I thought I knew was a constant, dull ache, but it was overshadowed by a new, icy determination. I watched Ashley and Julian, who now treated my house like his own personal headquarters. He came and went as he pleased, taking calls in the living room, his voice a low, menacing hum. He and Ashley would have hushed, intense conversations in the kitchen, their heads close together. They were a team, a twisted partnership built on greed and deceit. I continued to play my part, the grieving widow overwhelmed by the situation. I made vague promises about calling a realtor. I allowed them to think I was slowly, reluctantly giving in. They were so confident in their power, so sure of my weakness, that they grew careless. And that's when I saw the true, reptilian coldness of my daughter's heart. It happened late one night. I was pretending to be asleep, but my mind was racing. I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. I cracked my bedroom door open just enough to see. Ashley and Julian were standing in the dim light of the hall, their figures silhouetted. They thought I was asleep. They thought they were safe. "She's taking too long," Ashley whispered, her voice laced with a venom that made my blood run cold. "She keeps talking about Dad, about memories. Every day we wait is another day those other guys could find us." "Patience, my dear," Julian purred, his voice a low caress. He ran a hand down her arm. "Your mother is the sentimental type. We have to play this carefully. Pushing too hard will make her dig in her heels." "So what?" Ashley hissed. "We just wait for her to have a sentimental breakthrough. I'm not going down for this, Julian. I won't." There was a long pause. Julian's voice dropped even lower, becoming dangerously soft. "There is another way," he said, "a faster way. Realtors mean commissions, closing costs, taxes. It's messy. I have a buyer, a private investor, who will take the property as is for cash. All she needs to do is sign a quitclaim deed, sign her rights away. We could have the money in a week." My breath caught in my throat. A quitclaim deed. It was a fast track to theft, a way to get the house for a fraction of its value, leaving me with nothing. "She'll never sign that," Ashley said dismissively. "Not if she's in her right mind." "Then maybe," Julian said, his voice a chilling whisper, "she won't be in her right mind when she signs it." He paused. "There are substances, things that can make an elderly person confused, compliant. Something slipped into her nightly tea. She'll be foggy for a day or two. Sign the papers thinking there's something else, and by the time the fog lifts, we'll be long gone. She'll have no memory of it, and the house will be ours." I felt the blood drain from my face. They were talking about drugging me. My own daughter was conspiring to drug me to steal my home. I waited for Ashley to protest, to show a flicker of humanity, a shred of love or conscience. I prayed for it. "Say no. Ashley, please, say no." But the protest never came. Instead, after a moment of silence, she asked a question that shattered the last remaining fragment of my heart. "And the money?" Ashley asked, her voice cold and practical. "How do we split it?" 50-50, Julian said. "Once the house is sold and our old partners are paid off, we take the rest and disappear. A new life, anywhere you want." 50-50, Ashley repeated, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Okay, when do we do it?" I quietly closed my door, my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. The betrayal was absolute, a physical blow that knocked the air from my lungs. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was a monstrous lack of a soul. She was willing to poison me, to violate my mind and my body, for money and a life with this man. The little girl I had raised, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose tears I had dried, was gone. In her place was this cold-blooded stranger who was plotting my destruction. In that moment, something inside me broke, but it didn't leave me weaker. It was like a dam bursting, washing away all the soft maternal feelings of love and hurt, and leaving behind only the hard, unyielding bedrock of survival. My grief was gone, replaced by a white-hot rage. They thought I was a weak, sentimental old woman. They thought I was their victim, but they had forgotten who I was. I was a nurse. I had spent a career watching people, understanding symptoms, and dealing with life and death situations. I knew how to be precise, how to be patient, and how to fight for a life. And now, I was going to fight for mine. The final cold-blooded betrayal of my daughter had not been her victory. It had been her gravest mistake. It had just unleashed a side of me she never knew existed. The conversation I overheard in the hallway was a declaration of war. My daughter's final betrayal had cauterized any remaining wound of motherly love, leaving a clean, hard scar in its place. There was no more room for tears or sorrow. My grief had burned away, and from the ashes rose a cold, calculated fury. They wanted to drug me? They wanted to steal my home and leave me with nothing? I would not be a victim in my own story. I would be the author of their downfall. The next morning, I made them breakfast. I hummed a cheerful tune as I scrambled eggs, pouring them orange juice. I played the part of a woman who had finally seen the light. "You know," I said, setting a plate in front of Ashley, avoiding her eyes. "You were right. A house is just a house. Memories are in the heart, not in the walls. My only daughter's safety. That's what's important." I could see the flicker of triumphant surprise in her eyes, quickly masked. Julian, who sat at the table like a king in his court, gave me a warm, patronizing smile. "I'm glad you see it that way. Carol," he said, "it's for the best. I spoke to a realtor friend." I lied smoothly. "She said a private sale is much faster, less complicated." I looked at Julian. "Your idea was a good one." This was the bait. I needed them to believe they had won, that I was a compliant, broken old woman ready to be led to the slaughter. Their arrogance was my greatest weapon. As soon as they left the house on some vague errand, likely to procure the drugs they planned to use on me, I sprang into action. My first call was not to the police. Julian was smart. He had likely covered his tracks. A direct accusation would be my word against his, and he could easily paint me as a confused, grieving woman. No. I needed more than that. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to catch them in the act. My second call was to Dennis Kramer, the retired accountant Ashley had scammed. During our first conversation, he had mentioned that several other victims had banded together and contacted the authorities, but the case had stalled without a clear trail to the top players. "Dennis, it's Carol Miller," I said, my voice low and urgent. "I need your help. I have him. The man at the top. His name is Julian Croft, and he is in my house." There was a stunned silence, then a string of furious questions. I quickly explained the situation, that Julian and Ashley were planning to force me to sign over my house. "They think I'm on board," I explained. "I'm setting a trap, but I need a witness, and I need to get this to the right people. You said you spoke with the authorities?" "The FBI," he said, his voice now sharp with focus. "The Economic Crimes Division. The agent's name was Foster. He was frustrated. Said they were close but couldn't get the final piece to connect the money to the man. I'm going to give it to them. Dennis," I said, "but I need you. They plan to have me sign the papers in the next day or two. I need you to connect me with Agent Foster. Tell him the woman whose daughter was used as a pawn has the king in her living room and is ready to checkmate him." Dennis, energized by the prospect of justice, promised to make the call immediately. My plan was forming, a dangerous and intricate web. I needed more than just a recording of their voices. I needed them to expose the entire criminal chain. I went into Tom's old workshop and retrieved the ledger and the photograph from his footlocker. This was my leverage, the ace up my sleeve. This wasn't just about Ashley's Ponzi scheme anymore. It was about the sins of the father being visited upon the son. When I called Agent Foster myself an hour later, I didn't just introduce myself as a victim of Julian Croft Jr. "Agent Foster," I said, my voice steady. "My name is Carol Miller. 30 years ago, you had an investigation into a man named Julian Croft Sr. I believe his son is here in Ohio to finish his father's business, and I have his father's books." The line went silent for a beat. The change in the agent's tone was immediate, shifting from professional interest to intense focus. I had their attention. I explained the entire situation, from Ashley's arrival to the plan to drug me, to the discovery in the footlocker. I told him my plan, to pretend to agree to the sale, to arrange a meeting in my house with Julian and his private buyer, where the papers would be signed and the money discussed. "I want them all here," I said. "Julian, my daughter, and whoever he's working with. I want them on tape, discussing the sale, the money, everything. I want you to have them dead to rights." It was a risky, dangerous plan. Agent Foster was hesitant to put a civilian in that position, but I was adamant. "They betrayed me in my home," I said, my voice hard as flint. "So I will end this in my home. This is not just about getting justice for me. It's for my husband's memory and for all the people like Dennis Kramer they've destroyed. I will not be moved on this." After a long pause, he agreed. The trap was set. They thought my mother's grief had made me weak. They had no idea it had forged me into a weapon. They were walking into a spider's web, and I, the supposedly helpless fly, was the one who had spun it. The final act was about to begin. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I moved through my day with a calm I didn't feel, a placid smile on my face that hid the frantic pounding of my heart. The FBI team had been incredible. Under the cover of darkness, 2 discreet agents posing as telephone repairmen had installed nearly invisible audio and video recording devices in my living room, the camera's eye hidden in a smoke detector on the ceiling. Agent Foster had given me a clear set of instructions and a panic word, headache, which would signal them to storm the house if things went wrong. Julian was smug, confident he had broken me. He informed me that his investor was eager to close the deal and could be here tomorrow afternoon. He'll bring the paperwork and a cashier's check for the first installment. Julian said smoothly, "Quick and clean." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, my voice dripping with the false relief they expected. Ashley watched me with a strange mixture of guilt and impatience. A few times, I thought I saw a flicker of the daughter I once knew in her eyes, a shadow of doubt. But then she would glance at Julian, and her expression would harden again. She had made her choice. The day of the meeting arrived, a gray, overcast afternoon that matched the mood in my soul. I brewed a pot of tea, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Julian and Ashley were in the living room, waiting. I had the ledger and the old photograph hidden under a cushion on my armchair. At precisely 2 p.m., a black sedan pulled into the driveway. It wasn't the flashy sports car Julian drove. This one was all business. 2 men got out. One was a tall, severe-looking man in a tailored suit, carrying a briefcase. The other was broader, with the unmistakable look of a man paid to be intimidating. Julian greeted them at the door and led them into my living room, the stage for our final act. "Carol, this is Mr. Petrov, my associate," Julian said, gesturing to the man with the briefcase. The other man stood silently by the door, a silent gargoyle. "He's here to finalize our arrangement." "Mr. Petrov gave me a curt nod, his eyes cold and assessing. He opened his briefcase on the coffee table, revealing a thick stack of documents and a cashier's check. "The quitclaim deed," he said, his voice having a faint Eastern European accent. "You sign. We give you this first payment. The rest will be wired once the title is clear." "Of course," I said, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. I sat down in my armchair, feeling the hard corner of the ledger beneath the cushion. This was it. "Everything seems to be in order," Julian said, smiling at me. "Just sign at the bottom. Carol." I picked up the pen, my eyes on the document. Then I looked up, meeting Julian's gaze. "It's funny," I said softly, letting the pen rest on the paper. "My husband Tom always told me to read every line before signing." Julian's smile tightened. "It's a standard document. Carol, no need to delay." "I'm sure it is," I said. "But you see, my husband also kept very detailed records of his business dealings, all of them." I reached under the cushion and pulled out the old, dusty ledger. I placed it on the coffee table with a soft thud. The color drained from Julian's face. Mr. Petrov's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what that is," Julian said, his voice losing its smooth veneer. "I think you do," I replied, my voice growing stronger. I then pulled out the photograph of his father and my husband, shaking hands in front of this very house. I slid it across the table towards him. "Or perhaps you'll recognize this. A partnership, I believe. One that ended with your father disappearing and my husband holding all the assets. This isn't about Ashley's little scam, is it, Julian? It never was. You're here to collect on your father's investment." Panic flashed in Julian's eyes. He looked at Petrov, who was now staring at the ledger with raw fury. "What is this?" Petrov snarled at Julian. "You said this was a clean deal. An old woman with a clear title." "It is," Julian insisted, but his voice was strained. "This book says otherwise," I said, tapping the ledger. "It says this house was built with your father's dirty money. Julian, money his partners. Perhaps Mr. Petrov's family never saw. You weren't just here to get the house. You were trying to sell it back to the very people your father stole from, weren't you?" Petrov stood up, his face a mask of rage. He looked from the ledger to a terrified Julian. "You son of a bitch. You were trying to sell me what was already ours?" It was at that moment that Ashley, who had been watching in horrified silence, finally seemed to understand the depth of the game she was in. She wasn't Julian's partner. She was his collateral, his pawn. "Julian?" she whispered, her face ashen. Julian ignored her. He lunged for the ledger, but I was faster, pulling it back. Everything descended into chaos. Petrov shouted at Julian in a language I didn't understand. The bodyguard by the door started to move forward, and I said the word. "All this shouting is giving me a terrible headache," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the chaos. The front and back doors of the house burst open simultaneously. FBI agents in tactical gear swarmed into the living room, weapons raised. "FBI, nobody move!" Julian, Petrov, and the bodyguard froze, their faces a picture of shock and disbelief, as agents cuffed a sputtering Julian and a stone-faced Petrov. I saw Agent Foster emerge from the crowd. He gave me a single, appreciative nod. My eyes found Ashley. She was slumped on the sofa, sobbing, looking not at the agents or at Julian, but at me. Her face was a canvas of terror, regret, and the dawning, horrific understanding of just how thoroughly she had destroyed her own life. The trap had been sprung. The deception was over. All that was left was the wreckage. The aftermath of the FBI raid was a whirlwind of controlled chaos that felt strangely distant, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. Julian and Petrov's crew were led away in handcuffs, their faces grim masks of disbelief. The charming predator and his menacing associate were reduced to common criminals, their power evaporating under the fluorescent flash of police lights. Agents meticulously collected the evidence, the quitclaim deed, the briefcase, and most importantly, Tom's ledger, which I handed over to Agent Foster with a sense of solemn duty. Ashley was taken aside, questioned for hours right there in my kitchen. I sat in my armchair in the living room, a blanket draped over my shoulders by a kind female agent, and just listened to the murmur of her voice, cracking, pleading, finally breaking down into raw, unfiltered confessions. She told them everything about Julian's manipulation, about the Ponzi scheme, about the plan to drug me. Every word she spoke was another nail in her own coffin, but it was also the first honest thing she had done since she'd arrived. By the time the sun rose, the house was quiet again. The agents were gone, leaving only an official-looking receipt for the evidence they'd taken. Ashley was gone, too. She hadn't been arrested. Not yet. Agent Foster explained that her full cooperation had earned her a chance at a plea deal. She wasn't an innocent victim, but she wasn't the mastermind either. She would face consequences, felony charges, likely a long period of probation, community service, and court-mandated therapy. But thanks to her testimony, they had enough to dismantle the entire operation Julian was running and connect it to a wider criminal network. She wouldn't go to prison. She'd stood in the doorway before a federal marshal escorted her out, her face swollen from crying, her designer clothes looking like a sad costume. "Mom," she had started, her voice a raw whisper. I just looked at her. There was nothing left to say. The chasm between us was too vast, filled with too many lies and a betrayal so profound it had reshaped my world. I didn't offer words of comfort. I didn't offer forgiveness. I just gave her a small, tired nod. And then she was gone. In the days that followed, the silence returned to my house. But it was different now. It wasn't the comfortable silence of memory. It was the hollow silence of an ending. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture, looking at the photos of Tom. The knowledge of his secret had changed my perception of him. Yes, it had tarnished the perfect image I had held in my heart. He was not the saint I had believed him to be. He was a flawed man who had made a terrible choice for what he likely believed was the right reason, to give his family a better life. The house, my sanctuary, was a monument to both his love and his moral compromise. But as I stood on the porch, looking out at the rose bushes he had planted, I realized that Julian was wrong. Tom's legacy wasn't the dirty money. It was the 35 years of love he had given me within these walls. It was the home he had created, the laughter, the joy, the life we had built. The foundation may have been tainted, but the life we built upon it was real, and I had saved it. Ashley, stripped of her money, her reputation, and her false sense of entitlement, had to start from scratch. I heard through her court-appointed lawyer that she was living in a halfway house and had found a job as a waitress. For the first time in her life, she had to work for her food, for her rent. She had to face the world without the safety net she had so casually tried to burn. Maybe, just maybe, this was her only path to redemption. Maybe by living as a normal human being, she might finally learn how to be one. Our relationship was in ruins, perhaps irreparably, but as the first green shoots of spring began to push through the cold Ohio soil in my garden, I held on to a tiny, fragile sliver of hope. Hope that one day she might earn her way back, not to my home, but to my heart. For now, though, my home was safe, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. The storms have passed, and the quiet has returned. My house stands, not as a symbol of a perfect past, but as a testament to resilience. I saved my home, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to save my daughter. The hardest lesson has been accepting that some things, once broken, can never be fully mended. The love I have for the memory of my husband is more complex now, a tapestry of light and shadow, and my love for my daughter is a wound that may never completely heal. Justice was served to the wicked, but the scars remain on the innocent. I find my peace now in the simple things: the morning sun through the kitchen window, the scent of Tom's roses, the solid feel of the floor beneath my feet. This house is my anchor, a reminder that even when the foundations are shaken by secrets and lies, what we choose to build on top of them is what truly defines us. It is a legacy of survival. Have you ever had to make a choice between protecting a memory and protecting your future? How do you forgive someone who has committed the ultimate betrayal? I would be grateful to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories give me strength,